clarified the fundamentals. They said, well, one thing that we can say though is that we're not seeing, it's not like entirely impossible, but after we're not seeing any reason, we're not seeing anything why this weird behavior, if you like, okay, how this can produce any kind of materials property that we cannot achieve in a better fashion, more cheaply, with the other materials that we know. And they had a very good idea of all that, right? So they stopped. They say 2 or 3 years, we asked the right questions, but they asked the right question in the innovation sense of saying, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. That's all. Right? No, but what is it good for, right? And the answer came back relatively negative. I mean, it's not like, okay, well, there is a 10 millionth of a chance somewhere in the future that we'll okay? Well, it's still scientifically interesting, okay? Right? Now, 133,000 papers later, you see? Get the idea? Okay? So the question is context dependent, okay? And you're trying to make it fail. That's the thing what you always have to think about. How can it not work? How can it not be popular with a customer? How can I make, how can I, in the cost sense, okay? And if you can go after this most risky thing in the beginning, right? And if you can kill an innovation or an innovative idea effectively, you move on to the next one, okay? And so on, right? That's when you hopefully then not wasting money on that produces 133,000 papers, okay, of billions of dollars, hundreds of millions of whatever dollars of government, funding, okay, and the same thing here, or $500,000 and trying to push the professor for more patents. If you say look, no way, I don't know exactly, but if you're off by a factor of more than 10 in the cost-price relationship, okay, if you're off by a factor of more than 10 in the speed that you need, okay, or in the feedback signal strength that you get, or the signal to noise ratio that you have, or any kind of other, so that's why we said parameterize the space. It can be in the market space, it can be in the implementation space, okay, it can be, if you cannot possibly find a business model that, but usually there's ways, because that's tradable, okay, you talk to people, you make deals, whatever, but the point is, you're not going to break the speed of light. You're not going to find a new energy source no matter how you try, because we understand thermodynamics. That's one thing that we consistently understand extraordinarily well, okay? So it's not the energy generation, it's the energy consumption side. You might be and so on and so on. It's common sense, right? I mean, in a way, but you have to ask those right questions, okay? And a key piece is again, how can I make it fail? And don't be afraid to ask the question. Make sense? What it is specifically, that depends sort of on the field, but you have to think about how to make it fail. If this doesn't work out, I better not go on any further, okay? If I can't, even in the realm of the cost that is necessary, that, but usually when you find out, often this is how you learn, the redirection. You say this is not as cheap as I thought it would be, but the reality is that while you're doing this, you're discovering another manufacturing method, okay, that makes the deluxe version of it or something, okay, better, where you're well within the range, okay? Or you talk to the customer and you say you have an idea of the cost. It's okay, well, let's find out the price. And they say their valuation isn't close to high enough. But when you talk to them, they actually tell you what they actually like to have, and say I can't make the video VHS cassette, rewind fast enough without there's a nice German word for that we used to say, which is, translates this as tape salad, okay? People who still use tapes, you end up with this mess, okay? So, I can't do that, but you get to the point of, why do I have to rewind it at all? Let's make a DVD, right? Okay, see, you can only come up with these ideas and these redirections when you're deeply engaged in this process. Okay? Is that?
I think question. I think quite many people were interested. For example, if you do research in MIT and you make a patent, who is the owner of the patent?
MIT.
And if you wanna make a startup company with this patent,
You license it from the university.
You license from the university.
So there in the US, there is something called the, well, it depends on, like, when you say within MIT, it depends, okay? So mostly when I do it, well, it depends, okay? So if I am in the capacity of working for MIT, yes, okay? But that's the same thing pretty much as in a company. You have an employment contract, your intellectual property rights go to the company, right? You're still the individual inventor because inventors have to be individual, but the assignee is the company, right? If you're an undergraduate student at MIT, no such thing, right? No such thing, okay, right? The undergraduate student is a paying student that they're not using university resources, okay? So here's where it comes from, okay? And it's still, and this is not a good thing, okay, necessarily, because we can, Gene and I can talk at length about how this like doesn't work with lots and lots of experience, but okay. But fundamentally, the situation is like this. This all comes down to the Bayh-Dole Act, okay? Bayh-Dole Act, the 1980s, okay, that beforehand, the universities really didn't own any patents, okay? So, when you had a patent on government money, okay, on a grant, it was theoretically like the government's, but they never really like wanted to own it, okay, right? Okay. So basically, with the venture capital stuff and so on and so forth, it was like, okay, well, you know, the university is a 501, what's called a 501c3, a tax exempt for the public benefit organization, right? But you know, stimulating economic activity with patents, okay, which by the way it doesn't do, okay, you know, is because without the innovation process, you know, like if the innovation process is, if the patents in the university that you generate with university research are embedded in the innovation process, okay, then see, the innovation process should tell you what you should invent, not the invention and then the innovation process, right? Because you should invent something for a purpose, okay? It's like, you know, the innovation process is like, oh, there might be value, oh, I better like go in the lab and like now invent this, okay? It actually gives you the right justification for it. Then it can be very valuable, but they're just this random, what we call random science, okay, right? Just because, you know, there's, anyway, so that's a whole, you know, we can go in length and on about that. But Bayh-Dole Act, 1980s, is basically gives the university sort of like the right to own the patent. Okay. Now, what I mean by right is it's like this. When there is a federal grant, when the research is funded by the government, right? The government gives basically by default the right to the university. Right? But the university is often financed, so this is about, you know, also about, this is why the transfer stuff, you know, doesn't work at all really, this comes down to a tax legislation as well, okay? It's called 97-14, you know, it's a safe harbor thing, okay? Is if I am in a building that is doing research in a building that is funded by municipal bonds, which are very cheap, okay, very low interest, okay, and I'm doing corporate research, for example, in this, then then that space basically is cheaper than I would do it outside. Okay, so when a corporation sponsors this, then you know, it's also covered by the Bayh-Dole Act, and you know, like fair value has to be achieved in the marketplace, and you can't make a contract about it beforehand. Okay, that's the sponsored research side. If it's on the and also if it's a federal grant, it's the same thing, right? Like you basically have to, you cannot make a contract about the value, like when, you know, we cannot make an agreement before an IP agreement before the invention, okay? Because we don't know what its value is. And it has to be fair value, and you basically have to determine the value by the marketplace. It doesn't mean you have to totally shop it around. You can give first option to a company, but you don't know the price. Okay, so if it's overlapping with federal government, with federal money, okay, or it's happening in a building that's funded by municipal bonds, okay, because that's effectively a tax subsidy to that industry-sponsored research, okay. then you have to determine the price in this sort of like equal fair value is a little bit like a tender type process, abbreviated fashion. Okay. And the university sort of, owns that. So in terms of, and that is true like for all university employees, just like for company employees, right? If you are not doing research on federal money and you're not bound by this, as an employee or whatever of the university, right? You're a student, you're self-paying student, you're not a PhD student that is funded by government money, okay? Then you would own it on yourself. It has nothing to do with the university, right? But if you use university resources, these rules apply. Now, technically, again, they only apply if you have this overlap or this building thing. However, this is so difficult to keep apart in the university that it sort of applies to everything. Does that make sense? Help?
Yeah, as I understand you, if you're a professor and you want to make some patent, you just find a student and you make a patent.
No, it's not going to really work because again, it's like if you do the research, then yeah, you know where the federal, the machines that you use and so on and so forth. So.
But you're saying that you're paying licenses to the university, so does it mean that?
No, so what the university does, if you want to do a startup company, and MIT and Stanford are best at this, but they're still, this is not a money-making operation. They cover their own costs, okay? But it's not like nobody, like most university technology transfer offices are losing money, okay? Is that why I'll tell you in a minute, but if you want to do, if the professor, or whoever, wants to do a startup based on that patent, okay, the university does tend to give it, this licensing agreement to the startup company at pretty much, good conditions, okay, because it's the highest chance of success of getting it anywhere, right? Because those people know about it, okay? Now, random patents, and this is, I've been doing this with industry, or talking about it with industry a great deal. Random patents, okay, like just on random, what we call random research, okay, of no value. Like universities, sometimes, in industry, people get called, like, oh, I have all these, patents in this space, that where your products are, okay. Industry people go like, well, I get these calls every day. So what, okay? I don't know anything about it. I don't know what it's worth. I don't, basically, the essence of the story is if it is not embedded in an innovation process that gives this patent, this invention, a purpose, it's usually not worthwhile, and it's not even worthwhile to figure out whether it's worth anything or not. Certainly not for industry. Does it make sense?
Yeah, but I don't clearly understand why university should have a patent if they don't use it.
Well, this is the point. This is an effect of the.
What was the last question?
Huh?
What was the last question?
No, I'm curious because I mean.
Why the university has it anyway?
No,
It's
intellectual property rights.
Yeah,
but
if you,
again, it's a legislation. It's
entrepreneurs is asking me, should I have a patent for an idea? Of course you can, but why?
No.
Because if you have a patent, a big corporation is doing something wrong, you will be dead in the court to fight against the corporation. But what do you need? Well, you need a patent when if you start a production and some big corporation is coming to you and you say, okay, I have a patent.
okay.
That's
So
this goes is getting patent. I just really wonder why, because university is not a production company.
Yes. Okay. In Boston. Thank you. Okay, so this comes a little bit to the question of, what is IP worth at all, okay? And as a matter of fact, a little later in the course we have a week on this, right? Where, like, it is true, like, without a business strategy, without, implementation, without a plan to go to market, of course the patent isn't really worth anything, okay? Now, and it depends on what you're doing, whether you like an offensive or a defensive strategy makes sense, okay? But in general, patents, it's not like, it's a very specific right, but there's two uses of patents, okay? Once, like in the court, but only a small fraction of, ever goes to litigation, right? It really is also, let me put it in a simple way, it's like, these are bargaining chips too, right, in business. If you make business transactions, right, people cross-license in industry, portfolios of like 2,000 patents or something like that in a space. They accumulate that, okay? And it's a little bit like a bully game, okay? So they've been all active in this, and they patent these things, and they go like, ooh, like I'm MySpace, and the other goes, ooh, MySpace, and it goes on for a while, and they also like realize, okay, well, it doesn't make so much sense anymore, and so on and so forth, and but they don't really like know exactly what's every single aspect and every single patent of their portfolio they cross-license. Okay, it's a matter of like it's one way to retain market power. Now, for a small company, this can be very important if it's a fundamental innovation, right? And again, we'll go into this a little bit later, I think, in the course. But like for Gene, for example, it was one specific patent. Okay, Gene has 120 patents, something like that, okay, right? But it's like this one specific patent, okay, that made like, in the lawsuit against, with Intel, okay, right? As one specific patent that turns out, that you just can't get around, okay? But the point is, if you want to bring a device like this tomorrow, not just like this, okay? Like this, you probably I don't know what Apple has behind the iPhone, but a couple of hundred patents for sure, okay, right? Even like, the mouse is probably like, you're not going to do this without, 50 or whatever, or maybe 20 patents or something like that, right? I mean, one patent is not good enough to cover enough to give you like sort of a real bargaining position, in industry, but it is, even one patent can be good, okay, because it protects something, right? And it's all about sort of, so it's primarily about business risk, okay? And that's the same way you do contracts and agreements and, all sorts of things like that, okay? Right? It's when we're negotiating something, as two businesses, okay? And I come with my patent portfolio, you come with your patent portfolio, when I come with my production capability, and you come with yours, and I come with my, my partners, and you come with yours, and how do we do business, okay? Right? It's one of those things, right? So that you have to see these two things, right? The universities, again, they're not in the commercialization business, really, right? They can't be. They're not allowed to be, okay, because of their status, right? It's an artifact to some extent, I would say, of the venture capital era, okay? Where, how we say that really a lot of innovations were stored in the pipeline, of the Bell Labs, the Xerox Parks, and so on. Adobe Acrobat was a laser printer protocol developed by Xerox PARC. Okay, and venture capital, capitalized on, there's two important things. One is, first of all, there was already a lot of sunk investment in those technologies. Okay, and obviously venture capital was extremely profitable because it was also other people's money they were using, right? But also, secondly, the early venture capital guys were not neophytes. They were not new to this, okay, right? The real early venture capitalists were the guys who who actually created those companies. They were innovators. They knew what they were talking about, okay? They were not financial guys and so on, right? Okay, so and then obviously these two things, the human capital of real innovators becoming venture capitalists, and the innovation productive era, being then sort of entrepreneurially commercialized. Okay, these things ran out, a long time ago, and you can't reproduce this in other areas in the same way as in semiconductors, right? But it created this focus, okay, on venture capital and universities. And if you look at, the universities don't create innovations. They were always created in industry. The universities primarily supply the talent that industry needs to then actually. So it was AT&T Bell Labs and Xerox PARC that created it, not MIT or Stanford, right? But they created the talent. They created the people, right? So one interesting story about this, by the way, just as an aside, when Gene discovered strained silicon in AT&T Bell Labs. He was wondering about that. So IBM research and Daimler-Benz, reproduced this very quickly. Okay, and then the government started to invest in universities for strained silicon. He was like Bell Labs. He was like, that doesn't make any sense. We've just solved the problem. Why is the government now putting all this money, okay, into something that we've just solved? But there was something very clever about this, okay? And that's what the government at that point was not investing in. The government was investing in people to be trained. They knew that at that point they were listening to the signals that were being passed between the important labs in industry, right? Like, oh, this is the next thing, this is going to become important. We're going to need people who understand this. We're going to need PhDs to make this industry grow. So we better fund research projects to produce PhDs so that they can be available for industry to actually scale this up, right? That was a really clever thing about it. And this sort of thing, that system between government, university, and industry, that was maybe coincidentally, whatever, okay, but after World War II it was a unique situation, the US was the only industrial place in town, okay, and this formed, okay, right? And we talk about this like in more detail in the book and in the end of the book in the last lecture. And everybody in the world copied that system, okay? And same as like with the venture capital, when this sort of came out, everybody sort of like copied that system, okay? But there were specific circumstances of why it was so successful initially and why it happened, okay? And there's a couple more, but whatever, okay? And that was the time sort of when the Bayh-Dole Act was born, right? But it was not necessarily, but it wasn't